Hello, today my guest is Professor Jean-François Hennart. I will keep my introduction short to maximize our time with him. In the next 30 minutes or so, we'll talk about Jean-François as a person, then Professor Hennart is a thought leader and an esteemed scholar, and then is a mentor to many PhD students and junior faculty. And for the sake of time, I will skip many of his accomplishments and give you a very quick snapshot. Jean-François is a fellow of the Academy of International Business and the European International Business Academy. He has served as a consulting editor for the Journal of International Business Studies, served on the boards of JIBS, SMJ, Management International Review, Journal of World Business, International Journal of Research in Marketing, European Management Review, Journal of International Management, etc. So what does Jean-François do? Jean-François applies transaction cost theory to the study of international business institutions with particular attention on the multinational enterprises. So thank you, Jean-François, for joining us.
Thank you.
First question, always. What did you want to become when you were a child?
I wanted to become an archaeologist. So I was really interested in digging up, finding out old vestige of civilizations and Romans and so on and so forth. So I was really captivated by that. And very early on, I have a record actually when I was maybe 10 or so, talking about becoming an archaeologist.
Wow, that's super interesting. So what pushed you to be an IB scholar?
So it's, I was very much, I wanted to do a PhD in history. My father came to me and said, look, history you can do easily, but economics is really hard to understand and hard to study. So do economics, and then you can do history afterwards. So I did economics, I got a PhD in economics, and I've always been interested in the, economics as a tool to understand what was going on. When I was in France, right before I came to the US to do my PhD, there was a big debate about the role played by multinational firms, especially at that time, American multinational firms. You may remember there was the American Challenge from Jean-Jacques Servan-Schreiber. This was a big debate in France about are multinationals good or bad in terms of host societies, especially in France, because they were coming up and basically scooping up all French family firms, I would say, a little bit backward French family firms, and just basically buying them up and putting a lot of advertising in them, upgrading their marketing, mostly marketing, making them actually profitable. And this led to a big debate in France. So when I came to the US, this was actually in the back of my mind. And when it came time to do my PhD thesis, I decided I wanted to tackle that. But then when I looked at whether or not, obviously, to be able to understand that, you must have a theory of why do multinational firms exist. And when I wanted to do that, I realized there was the theory that was there I didn't like. Really, I don't think actually answered any of the question that I was asking. And so I again proceeded to create my own theory, basically. Own theory and using property right theory, using agency theory, and using the very beginning of transaction cost theory. But this is actually, we're talking about 1974, so even before Williamson's first book. So in the process, I created really a sui generis theory, which later on I hitched on transaction cost theory because that was kind of the rocket that would carry me to actually be recognized. I couldn't say this is Hennart's theory. So I basically hitched my wagon on transaction cost theory. In the process of doing that, I actually realized that I was in economics, of course. I realized that to understand the multinational firm, you have to understand the internal working of the multinational firms as well as the workings of markets. And so I started to read widely into the management literature. So here I was in economics, writing a theory, a thesis on the theory of the multinational firm. When it came to, so then I decided, I got an offer from the UN to spend a year in Africa. So I spent a year in Niger, in Africa. When I came out, I got an offer in Paris to be a consultant for 2 years in Paris. And I decided, well, that was kind of really interesting. It was actually it was social research. I was looking at trade unions, French trade unions. And I did that for a year and a half. Then they ran out of money, and I had to look to be on a job market. I looked for a job in economics, and I got an offer from Florida International University in a department that was international business and finance. And they wanted me to teach the external environment of international business. So basically, trade theory, theory of the multinational firm, exchange rate determination, which I already had done basically to work on my thesis. So I said, why not? I was paid twice what I would earn in the economics department. So I said, well, I'll just go into business and into international business. But of course, I knew nothing about international business as a field, as a social field. My advisor was Mansur Olson, so he was basically in public goods theory in economics. A very bright guy, very much a role model for me, but he had he knew nothing about international business. And so I started from scratch, basically. Bobby Gross at University of Miami told me about AIB, and little by little, I just basically joined from economics to management and to international business. So that's the way I came into the international business.
Super interesting. If you had to choose a second best alternative career path, stop doing what you're doing today, and
I think
go back.
I would teach business history. I really am. I find that actually I'm always interested in archaeologists. I'm always interested about the past, but I found business history very, very useful in triggering, I think, imagination. So to give an example, there is all this literature about the new economy, and the internet-based economy. You look back and look at the evolution of, for example, Sears Roebuck, and you see exactly the same problem that Amazon has today, exactly the same, or eBay has today. Sears Roebuck started by being a seller of third-party. Sears Roebuck was basically established by mail order, right? So catalog and mail order. Sears Roebuck basically became a feasible alternative when the U.S. Postal Service decided to have what's called rural free delivery, which means that they would actually deliver to every single farm as opposed to leaving the packages in the main cities. So then Sears became quite popular because it allowed people to order things that, there were no, if you were in the middle of the prairie, there was no stores right by, right? So it became very popular. And they started by actually selling not their own goods, but the goods of other people. And what happened is that they basically got into trouble for selling inferior merchandise, which is exactly what's happening today with Amazon. As you know, the European community is starting inquiry into making the platform responsible for content. So Sears, the first step that Sears had was actually to verify, to have the in-house laboratory to control the quality of the goods they were selling, and then little by little they started to sell more and more of their own goods. So the problem of Sears in the 1900s or 1890s, 1900s are the same as the problem of Amazon today. The technology is not the same, but there is a lot of similarities, and this is just one example. There is many other examples that you look at. Business history basically gives you a perspective and makes it possible for you to abstract from the immediate and then look at the fundamental. And so if I wasn't teaching international business, I would be teaching business history.
This is interesting because from a business history perspective, when you talked about the French firms, family firms, small firms, heritage assets, firms that have authentic ways of doing things, which is disappearing because of the MNCs, etc. There is something to be done. Maybe we can talk about it more in the research segment.
Yep.
Before we get to research, I'm curious about your regrets. What is the one thing you wish you would have done that you didn't?
So it's you have to understand. I came from economics. My advisor was somebody who had published in books. When I finished my PhD, I was not aware of what was going on in international business field. So, for example, I had no idea. I wrote my whole thesis without knowing. I knew about Heimer, but I didn't know at all about Buckler and Casson. Buckler and Casson actually published their book 1 year before I finished my thesis. And so instead of kind of jumping in and getting myself known, I sent my book to a publisher, to actually First Basic Books, who turned it down, and then to University of Chicago Press. And there, the guy that was supposed to review it sat on it for 1 year. Actually, his name is Alibert. He sat on it for 1 year, and then, not knowing anything about business because he was an economist, basically rejected it. So I lost a whole year and a half, and then I was then in Africa. So contacts, and I sent it to University of Chicago, Michigan Press, but contact with the presses, being in Africa was not that easy, and so I basically lost there 2 years. And in the meantime, Rugman came to Reading, so Buckland Casson's work, and went with it, right? So I failed to place my contribution. I basically failed on first mover advantages, or maybe early follower advantages. And by the time my book came in 1982, it was actually, I still think it's best. I mean, you excuse me for being proud of my work, but I still think it's by far the best treatment of a transaction cost, property rights, agency theory, treatment of why multinational firms exist. But it came, it was a follower as opposed to a leader, because of those 3 years. Some of them due to my lack of knowledge of the market. So I was totally ignorant of, for example, of Rugman. I became aware of Rugman work when I started my job at FIU. So this is, in 1980. Yeah, I think 80. Yes, 80. So, so between 77 and 80, there was 3 years basically where it's a regret. I mean, you can understand why it happened, but still, I think it was a crucial time in the future career, which I missed the boat on that.
Yeah, there's a similar Ronald Coase story about how his actual real paper has a 37-year lag, and he has to push for it. He had to push for it again. I mean, markets are efficient. It worked out great at the end, in the end for you. Now let's talk about research. How would you summarize your research to laymen, people who don't read your work often?
So my main contribution is that I have a theory of why markets fail, and that's also the theory I think that Williamson has, and to some extent the theory that Buckler and Casson have. Why do markets fail? But beyond that, I have a theory of why firms succeed. And also I have a theory that just because markets fail doesn't mean that firms will succeed. And I think this is really the core of my contribution. And what's behind it is actually a theory that there are only two modes of organizing individuals, the two ways in which you persuade individuals, or you organize the cooperation of individuals. One of them is by controlling their output, which is what markets does. And the other one is by controlling their behavior, which is what hierarchy as a mode of organization does. And then set up the conditions under which control of output, control for exchange of output is efficient, when it's not efficient, and when control for monitoring of behavior is efficient, and when control for or coordination for monitoring of behavior is not efficient. So that's, I think, the core of my contribution. The other core of the other major contribution is, and which makes it possible to explain hybrids, is the difference between the two core mechanism of exchange, hierarchy and the price system, and actual institutions. And the idea that actual institutions do a mix and match of those two basic coordination mechanisms. And so you can basically explain hybrids as modes of organization. For example, if you look at franchising, a mode of organization that uses mostly price control, the price system, because franchisees basically earn their keep through the sale of output, the hamburgers and whatnot, but they are also subject to behavior constraints. And those behavior constraints are the QSC guidelines. In other words, in a system that would be pure market system, a franchising contract would be replaced by cameras and sensors, in which the free riding by the franchisee would immediately lead to an increase in the take of the franchisor to punish the franchisee for actually having reduced the quality of the output. So why do you have behavior control, which are the QSC guidelines? You have behavior control because of the inability of a price system to control everything. And likewise, you can go back and explain the use of price system in firms. For example, you look at piecework, or you can use at what's called inside contracting in the 19th century, or you can use attributing in the mine in the 19th century as a system in which the weakness of hierarchical control is alleviated by giving an output incentive to organizational members. So I think this is a key concept, which unfortunately has still not been understood by many people, especially most of the people actually that look at hybrids. They really haven't understood that. And Williamson does a terrible job on that. I think his theory of hybrid doesn't make much sense.
Jack Kirchleifer has a textbook on price theory. And I think it should be one of the books that we should basically cover in management or IB teaching. It is underappreciated, underutilized, and very much, I think, omitted, the price concept. We don't really touch it, which brings me to the next question. What are the few omitted variables in IB research, and what have we not studied or we've forgotten the importance of?
Okay, so my problem with IB research is that there are lots of errors that are committed by IB scholars, which no one seems to be basically taking on. So my problem with IB is that, but we can talk later on. I think you're going to ask me a question, which is on that, so we can talk about it. But let me introduce this by saying that there are a huge number of things in IB that don't make any sense, which people accept without ever criticizing them. And I have here a long list. For example, people talk about joint ventures. Say a joint venture has to be a separate legal entity, right? My view, this is a legal description of joint ventures. And then they go on and look, for example, in the pharmaceutical industry, and they say, or like looking at Agadon database, for example, and say joint ventures are in regression. There are fewer and fewer joint ventures. But the essence of joint venture is not being a legal entity. That means there are two owners with a separate legal entity called a joint venture. The essence of joint venture is actually ex post residual sharing. Export, I say residual because it can be profit or it can be output. That is the essence of a joint venture. So if you look at if you define joint venture as a legal entity, you are basically missing the boat. That's just one. Another issue is about joint venture being unstable, and the idea that joint venture disappear because of difficulty with the partners. Well, you have to separate. There's two ways of exiting a joint venture. A joint venture can exit because of the dissolution of the entity, it goes bankrupt. A joint venture can exit because the partner decide to change the sharing of the entity. That is totally different. And actually, I have shown with co-authors, it's actually explained by totally different topics, right? So you have to be very careful when you look at joint ventures. Another thing which I think is really, really funny is this whole literature about joint venture being undertaken to learn. And think about 2 minutes. Why do we co-author? I have co-authorship with the Japanese co-authors. I have co-authorship. One of my papers about counter trade, and I have a co-authorship with somebody in marketing, which knows very well about building scales. Most of my co-authorship is because I don't want to learn.
Yes, interesting.
Right? And yours as well, right? So what is this nonsense about joint venture being for learning, right? Okay. Family managed firms cannot export. Well, just go anywhere in France, in Germany, in Switzerland, in Italy, and you find family managed firms, not only small one, by the way, also a very large one. And a good example of that is Olivetti. Olivetti managed a very international operations in the 1920s all the way to the 1970s when they disappeared with family members. So all of their managers were family members, and the firm did very well. If you look at small firms, and this is all based basically on the Uppsala model, right? So they're not supposed to be able to sell abroad because they are supposed to not to have the right managers because they're family members and they don't know anything about foreign markets. And also because going abroad is going to require a lot of money. And this is basically based on the Uppsala model, where you need to set up foreign subsidiaries to reach your foreign customers. And if you set up foreign subsidiaries, you need basically to have local knowledge. And when the product, like cars or has to be like Volvo in the Uppsala model, has to be adapted to local condition. But of course, why would you expect family firms to adopt the same business model as large firms? It's a bit like expecting, Iran, right? Expecting Iran to fight the Americans in the Gulf with aircraft carriers. Of course not. What they're going to do is that they're going to use very fast patrol boats, right? Which are going to go and send out 50 cheap missiles at the aircraft carriers, and they're basically going to go around the net of the Americans, right? And fight the war the way it's best for them. The same way, somebody told me, by the way, about this. Somebody told me that the Taliban, the Americans have very expensive helicopters with very expensive heat-seeking missiles. The way the Taliban basically counteracted that is by buying 50 cents space blankets and covering themselves with space blankets. So there is no warmth, right? There is no warmth trace. And the Americans are sending their, I don't know, 10,000, 15,000 missiles, and it hits the sand. So why would you expect family firms to play the same, to use the same tools as large firms when they go abroad, and in fact they don't. They sell niche products, and niche products can be sold abroad very cheaply.
So, Jean-François, I have a question. Let me just summarize what you said. First, important things, what are omitted and needs to be done in the IB research. We're combining a couple of questions here, is looking at residual claimants and property rights, integration of property rights into IB more, right? This is one of the items.
My main idea is that there is all kind of silly things being replicated and reproduced in the IB literature. And what I would like is not a question that omitted variable. It's not a question of new areas in which you should go into. It's the idea of using common sense and actually starting to look at things in a more critical way. And I mean, I have a long list. I mean, counter trade, for example. If you looked at bond globals, it's another issue. If you look at the use of FDI, you know, people use, for example, FDI flows. They don't understand that FDI flows are net, calculated on a net basis. So zero FDI flows both means no foreign investment and means repatriation of profit equal to the flow of investment. How many people know that, right? People are using those things without knowing what they're talking about. I mean, people are talking about MNEs learning. Okay, so MNEs are learning organizations. So answer this question. If MNEs are learning organization, why is it that when they send an expatriate manager back from an expatriate assignment, they don't have the new manager staying with the old managers at least 3 months in a foreign position, but instead the people cross each other in the air? If multinationals were learning organization, is that what you would see? Right? Don't you think that's a question that you should answer, that the literature should answer before you make an assumption about learning?
So, Jean-François, what's the advice? What's the next 5 to 10 years? If there's a PhD student or a junior faculty who sees now hears or thinks about these inconsistencies, what are the things that they need to do or not do to get into this trend of fixing these or addressing these inconsistencies?
So I think what they should do is stop reading the literature and start reading The Economist and the Financial Times. I'm being provocative here, right? And that is, question things based on what you read, question things based on your personal experience. And people don't do that. They read the literature and they are basically then become part of the same reproduction mechanism in which things are just being reproduced ad nauseam. So to give you another example, there is 161 articles on family firm internationalization. I probably have read about 40 of them, right? 161. So there's a brand new survey that came out in October by Casprini and others. I basically went through the text of this survey and I searched for niche, niche strategy. Turns out, according to this survey, there is 2 articles on niche strategies and family firm internationalization out of 161. One of them is a piece I had in 2019 with Mayuki and Folani. And the other one, which was a point in GIBS, and the other one is a counterpoint by Edelston et al. 161 articles, and no one has asked the question, maybe they don't have to follow Uppsala when they sell abroad. Now, why is it that I question this? Because I talk to people, because I visit firms, because I look around, because when I'm on the when I'm on the plane and I find somebody next to me, I start conversation. When I'm in a cocktail party, I talk to people. I read The Economist, I read the Financial Times. I mean, confront what is written in the literature with reality, and you will find all kind of unexplored or poorly explored question. And I think this is really where you come up with new ideas. Question things. You should question things. Give you another example. The three pillars. This whole story about the three pillars of institutional theory. Is there really three pillars? I mean, does your experience as I suppose you were not born? Are you in the US now? Are you based in the US?
Yeah.
You were not born in the US, right?
No.
Okay, so you're confronting American culture. Is there three separate pillars in American culture? I can tell you, in Dutch culture, I can actually all of this converge into one pillar, only one single pillar. Everything is consistent. There's no three pillars.
What's the one pillar?
It's not one pillar. I mean, Dutch, everything in the Netherlands is on the idea that doing business and making money is good. And that explains the tax code, that explains that they basically are trying to be a tax haven. That explains, I mean, I could go into long, how do you handle tax issues in the Netherlands, which is really interesting compared to, for example, France. It explains why it's perfectly okay in the Netherlands for trucks to block the road to make deliveries, where in other countries the police would come and tell them to, even though there is huge traffic, they cause huge traffic jams and nobody clung their horn. Doing business is good in the Netherlands. And so people have respect for trucks blocking the road because they're doing business.
Interesting.
So it's all consistent, and the regulation, the tax regulation, the value system, all of that is entirely consistent. There is no three pillars. I mean, anybody I think who has actually any experience of living abroad knows there is no three pillars. There's only one.
Jean-François, you gave a lot of things to think about, for sure. But what is one question that I should have asked you but didn't?
What question you should have asked me and it didn't? I don't know. I think maybe you should have asked the question, do you think that you are typical of all the people in international business? Or do you think you are typical of all the people doing research? Maybe that's the question you should have asked.
No, we know the answer. It is not.
Maybe. I don't know. I don't know what question you should have asked me.
But last point you raised about people not reading business press or talking to managers, I think there is something there. That's for sure. And clearly, I mean, when we were talking about the Dutch way of thinking or the Dutch pillar, I was thinking of Mistral, the surf company, the Dutch famous Blue Dot company. I mean, I can see what you're saying. I can see why in certain parts of the globe, these are different. They are different.
Yeah, but what's really important here is a consistency, right? So I think when you are living abroad, I mean, maybe one of the things which is, in a way, I'm a bit different from most people, is that I have lived all of my life abroad and working for foreign institutions. So I have lived in the US working for US universities. I have lived in the Netherlands working for Dutch universities. I am now working in Italy, working for an Italian university. I have worked in Portugal doing accreditation working, in which I was the only foreigner in a team of Portuguese doing evaluation of Portuguese universities. So my whole life, I've basically tackled being a foreigner, right? Liability of foreigners, and also, by the way, advantage of foreigners, right? Because there's both. And so when you are abroad, you need to understand what makes people here tick, right? For example, how do you bargain? It's very, very different depending on the countries, right? Or do you go around rules and regulations, right? You always need to go around rules and regulations, but how do you do it? And all of those things you need to know if you're going to survive. So I think that this forces you to understand the logic of a particular culture. And that logic is very much integrated, because once you got the logic of it, you can solve many, it's a bit like a theory, right? You can solve many problems because you can anticipate. You're not always right? I mean, it's a difficult process, but you can anticipate the way things will work. And it allows you basically, so the first stage when you go abroad is kind of misunderstanding and frustration, because nothing seems to make sense. And after a while, you find a way to say, oh yeah, but that explained this, right? So this is the way I'm supposed to behave. And this is, what to expect, okay, so you make a request, nobody answers. Well, in the Netherlands, you should ask a second time, because people say if you just ask once, maybe you're not that interested. So you learn kind of, and maybe I'm totally wrong, maybe some Dutch person will say I'm totally wrong, but you have heuristics, and those heuristics are about culture, right? And you know that there is no separation between the different spheres of activity. The mentality and the law are very much aligned. It's very, very logical.
Thank you,
But it takes a
Jean-François.
while to understand it. It takes you a while to really figure that out.
Half an hour is never enough with great thinkers like you, but we're out of time. Thank you so much for this interesting and candid interview. I learned a lot, and I'm sure others, the audience, will agree with me. Thank you for your time.
Okay, you're welcome.